Hello and welcome to the Schola Progenium. Today we'll be talking about Baals and how you can use them to effectively defeat a variety of opponents if you know how to use them in a balanced list. So, as usual, I'll be splitting this video down into a couple of broader categories, and then we'll break those categories down further as we go along. So first of all, what we'll be looking at is what can Baals do in your force on your battles. And then we'll be looking at the loadouts that they can take and what you should be using, and then how to use them effectively in your battles, the specific way you should be using them, and a couple of tips and tricks you can use to help you win games. So, what can they do? Well, they can fill a variety of tasks in your army, and one of the things that Baals do is that they are really flexible in where they can target units on the battlefield, and the variety of units that they can target in a variety of situations, such as in cover, out of cover, that kind of thing. But there are ways you should use your Baals to make sure that you are making the most out of them, because although they are tactically flexible, it is very easy to waste their firepower shooting at something that you shouldn't be shooting at. So we'll discuss that further in the section on how to use them effectively. But what you essentially want to take away from what Baals can do overall is that really they're an essential component of a Blood Angel's force, because our armies are very elite focused. We have a lot of elite units in our codex, and a lot of our army and tactics is very elite focused. You know, our Death Company, Sanguinary Guard, Terminators, that kind of thing. So, and hard-hitting units. And the thing is with those hard-hitting units is that they are an expensive investment, and they need to be delivering units to you, destroying units every turn for you, and like units that are important to the enemy and important to the game. And if you want to be using them like that, you don't really have the time to target OBSEC units or kill down big blocks of infantry if you're fighting horde armies. There's lots of jobs that you don't want to waste their time doing, and that's where the Baals step in. And one of the advantages of why you would use Baals for this task is essentially because they don't risk themselves essentially when performing this task. So if you use other units in the Blood Angels army, close combat units, infantry units, or elite units to do the job of killing down the mass of enemy models in the army, or even just killing down OBSEC units, even if they're not a horde army, they've just got a balanced amount of infantry, but killing those infantry down with your elite units often exposes them. They'll come down, they'll charge, they'll kill those infantry off, and then because they've exposed themselves, they'll get shot up, and they might not get wiped out. You may play them well, but they'll have lost some of their firepower, some of their damage dealing capacity, some of their momentum. The enemy will have had a go at them, and you've wasted some of those models and a lot of your points and a lot of your time killing units that they really shouldn't have been killing. And that's what the Baals will do for you. They will allow your main units, your key units, to do their job, so the Baals can do sort of the heavy lifting in other areas, like in the sort of the meta game. So how do they do that sort of in more detail? Well, what you're going to do is, as I mentioned, you're going to thin OBSEC units down, and you're going to do that in a variety of ways over the course of the game, and I'll discuss that in further detail later on in the video. What you're also going to do is you're going to bully toughness 3 units, because you're going to be taking assault cannons, and I'll discuss why later on. But because you've got those assault cannons, they're strength 6 and they're firing 12 shots because they're twin assault cannons, AP -1. Now usually a toughness 3 model, at best a fire warrior has like a 4-up save. So you're going to be giving them a 5-up save, and you're going to be wounding on 2s. So even without character support, you're going to be getting 8 or 9 hits just with one assault cannon off your one Baal. You'll be getting 7, sometimes 8 wounds. If you get lucky, don't roll any 1s. And then you can just murder them because they won't get much of an armor save, because they're toughness 3. Generally that goes hand in hand with having a rubbish armor save that the AP -1 will really make a difference with. Now what else can they do? They can clear objectives for you, like totally clear objectives. So if there's if you've got a Baal or two on the field, and ideally you want two working together, which we'll discuss later, but if you've got those Baals on the field, they can realistically later in the game, if there's an objective that is only defended by infantry, even if you can't take that objective off the enemy, or even if you intend to take that objective off the enemy, either way, the infantry that are defending it are not safe if you have those Baals there. They can strip them down very, very quickly. And then what else can they do? Well, they can take objectives, depending on where they're operating on the battlefield, and the way that they work, being able to just rip apart OBSEC units. Sometimes you will find in the late game that there are objectives in the midfield, or even in the enemy sort of deployment zone, or around the backfield, that are totally unoccupied, no one's on them. And those Baals, they can move fast, and then they can advance, and you can use the Blood Angel stratagem to move them further. Still, if you want to, and you can push on to a totally unoccupied objective, and even though they haven't got OBSEC, and they're only one model, or two models, they can realistically, I've done it a million times, take an unoccupied objective, just grab it in the late game, which is a really good way to win a game and secure a victory in the 5th turn, and hopefully hold it. Now, what are some of the disadvantages of Baals? Well, the first thing that I would say is that there's a big gap between what they can hurt and what they can't hurt, and you really need to get to grips with this. So when you're fighting your battles, you need to be very aware of what your Baals will really do well and what they will just basically do 1 or no wounds to. So you want to be shooting at toughness 3 stuff, toughness 4 stuff, infantry at the most, but ideally toughness 3 infantry, toughness 4 infantry, and you want to also be shooting at basically 1 wound models, because you will find that a Baal's firepower shooting against multi-wound infantry units just really drops off very quickly. Even though you're doing effectively the same amount of wounds, Baals really excel in the area of taking models off the board. That's what you want to be doing with them all game, is taking models off the board, enemy models off the board one at a time, and when possible, shoot at infantry units with just 1 wound. But in comparison, if you're shooting at even a toughness 6 light vehicle, they won't be very effective. They will let you down. They will leave you feeling disappointed. I think one of the reasons why Baals are not considered that competitive is because they're not that effective, or they're very disappointing even when you shoot at an armoured unit, because just the fact that the armoured unit has toughness 6 means that, almost like how toughness 3 units go hand in hand with poor armour, those higher toughness units go hand in hand with better armour. And you see that even with the volume of shots that the Baal has, because it's wounding on 4s instead of 3s or 2s, which is what you'd normally be getting, your 8 shots quickly drops from potentially 8 wounds if you're lucky, 7-6 wounds against, if you're unlucky, or against slightly tougher infantry units, quickly drops off to just 4 wounds. And then instead of them having a 5-up armour save which drops to a 6-up and basically isn't there, and you take basically all the infantry off that you've wounded, instead they've actually got a 4-up invuln, or a 3-up armour save that goes to a 4-up, or something like that. So they save most of the remaining, or at least half of the remaining wounds that you've put on. So you need to recognise that huge gap between where they can be doing effectively 10 wounds a turn per Baal really easily, or getting struggling to get 1 or 2 wounds, maybe 3 wounds on an armoured vehicle. So that's what you really need to accept. You need to be using these Baals to be shooting at infantry. You need to be shooting them in a way where they are taking wounds away from the enemy in some way or another, because the Baals are all about working behind the scenes to secure that victory at the end of the day. And the more models you can take off the board, and the more wounds you can strip away quickly from the enemy, it reduces their board control, and the enemy will find themselves very quickly sort of clinging on 2 objectives, whereas they would normally have a 10-man or two 10-man units of infantry on a backline objective. Suddenly, because the Baals have been in the midfield spraying them up, they're clinging on with 2 or 3 models at best, and you can snatch it off them. So you need to acknowledge that big gap and not be shooting at units when the Baals are not going to be doing much damage. Now, one of the other things is that you need to sort of recognise is that they can be trapped by assault very quickly and very easily. And when you trap them, when they get trapped, obviously then when they pull out, they can't shoot very well. And because sometimes they'll be operating up to the midfield, although I'll try and discuss how you should try and avoid that and still keep them effective. If they get trapped, because they're a vehicle, that will reduce your firepower massively. So that's just a standard thing with all vehicles that you need to be aware of, really. So it's not a specific disadvantage to Baals. So what loadout should you be taking with your Baals? Well, for me, really, it just comes down to one specific loadout, and that is the double assault cannon with heavy bolter sponsons. Now, the reason why you always take the heavy bolter sponsons is because, as I said, it is an expensive unit, a Baal, if it's not getting those wounds on on the enemy, if it's not killing models. So you want those. You've paid your expensive base price for the sort of Rhino chassis, the Predator chassis, so to speak. So for the very minor investment of 20 points, you get your heavy bolters stuck on there, pounding out 6 extra shots a turn, killing lots more infantry, a couple of infantry models a turn, which really adds up. So your assault cannons you want to be taking because they at 24 inches range, they're just absolutely deadly. High volume of shots, good damage dealing potential against basically any infantry unit. Now, you don't really want to take the flamer. I have used Baals extensively across many editions. I own 5 of them, and they've performed a variety of functions throughout the various editions. In 5th edition you could outflank them, bring them on sort of one flank of the enemy, potentially tank shock and a troops unit holding an objective, or start shooting stuff up, shooting up the back armour of tanks with their assault cannons, that kind of thing. So they were really effective at sort of those jobs back then, and now they've sort of taken on this new role. And in this new role, this sort of flamestorm cannon is just really a waste of time. So just don't bother taking the flamestorm cannon because it's just not worth it. The base price of the unit for an 8-inch range model, if you're getting that flamestorm cannon into range, you're going to get 1 burst off with it. You might, probably, if you're lucky, get 4 hits with the flamestorm cannon. It's only 1d6, and then they'll just charge it next turn, and even if they don't destroy it, it's not going to be attacking anything, so it's useless, really. Even with the automatic hits on Overwatch, it's just a waste of time. So, how are you going to use your Baals effectively? We've discussed what they can do, the different tasks they can perform, and what you should be focusing on as an overall philosophy with your Baals. So let's have a look at sort of how to specifically use them in your battles over the turns, 1 to 5 and beyond. What you should be focusing on in each turn, and sort of some specific tactics and tricks you can use with your Baals to help you win games. So, the first thing that you're going to do is, from turn 1, you're probably going to have to move, and that's fine, because you want to get those assault cannons into range. Now, they may well have moved some infantry slightly forward onto an objective that's slightly outside of their deployment zone or something like that. And if that's the case and they're in range of your Baals, that's great. But I usually set my Baals, quite far back, so they can't get, assaulted by units that drop in close by in the enemy's first turn, or move forward to have extra moves like sentinels, that kind of thing, And I've learned that lesson the hard way in my own games, and I still make the mistake from time to time of placing my Baals too far forward in my deployment phase. But best bet probably you're going to have to move them anyway because of the 24-inch range. The enemy's not likely to move infantry forward in the vicinity of the Baals, into range of the Baals, so you're going to move them anyway. Keep them back, keep them safe, and then move them forward into an area of the battlefield that you want to start affecting with them, or just move them forward into your battle lines. So, turn 1, you're moving them forward, probably from your back lines, from the back of your deployment zone up to the mid, or up to the front of your deployment zone. And then, basically, what you're going to do is you're just going to trim the fat. So you're just going to target infantry units, ideally toughness 3, as I said before, and you're just going to try and kill as many models as possible, but the key balance here is to not have an obvious impact. You see, the longer these Baals can sort of work unobstructed, the better your chances of winning the late game become, because as an elite army, as I said, you've got probably fewer models on the table often than the enemy. When that late game comes, sometimes you've lost some key units and you've not got that much board control anymore sometimes if the dice haven't gone your way. So you really want those Baals to be operating in such a way that they're just trimming the fat. So you have your Baals, and I recommend having them as 2 in hunting packs. You can take 1 if you want, but at 2,000 points, I'd really, if you've already invested in 1, invest in 2, because they just really, really work well as a hunting pack. And the reason they work well as a hunting pack is the enemy will perceive them as 1 unit, effectively. If you have those 2 Baals sat sort of back of your midfield when you deploy, and you start moving them around as a unit of 2, and shooting them as a unit of 2 at the same time, the enemy will start to perceive them as 1 unit, and they will think, often, I don't want to target those Baals right now, because if you use them right, and as I said, not have an obvious impact with them, they'll see it as almost too big of a unit to deal with when it's not doing that much. They won't just think, I'll just blow up 1 Baal. They'll think, I can't be bothered to deal with both those Baals when all they're doing is killing a few of my infantry. So what you're going to do is you'll fire an assault cannon at 1 unit of infantry, and you'll fire your heavy bolters somewhere else. You fire your other assault cannon to a unit of infantry, and your heavy bolters somewhere else. Now those heavy bolters can be at units of infantry to finish them off, but your heavy bolters in your army, they're there to sort of top up wounds on stuff, because they can, just plink off reliably 1 wound on a variety of targets, especially en masse. So you might shoot other units first, and if there's an enemy transport that's left on a couple of wounds, you'd shoot your assault cannons sort of first 1 or 2 turns at infantry, and you'd be shooting your heavy bolters to sort of plink off extra wounds and help other units around the battlefield, because you've got that 36-inch range. And that way, your Baals aren't having too much of an obvious impact, but they are helping you. They are just plinking off wounds here and there, helping other vehicles getting blown up, trimming the fat, reducing objectives from being very secure and a massive infantry to not very secure. Say there's an enemy, there's an objective that you fancy taking in the midfield, and there's some infantry nearby it, and they could, if you go for that objective, they could counter assault you. Thin them out. It's nothing obvious. They're not being used yet. The enemy's not like, I really need to use them, so they really missed them in their next turn. It's just stuff that it affects them. They're aware of it, but because you've got other stuff going on, because you've got your Land Raider or your Predators or all your other stuff with last cannons that are vehicles, because you've got other threats going on, the Baals aren't their priority target. They're aware of them, but they're too big to deal with for too little impact, they think. But really, that is massively working to your advantage, because they're just trimming away. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that you need to use your Baals flexibly but strictly. Now, what do I mean by this? Now, what I mean is, your Baals in turns 1 to 3, because all you care about is taking infantry models off the board with them, and just trimming the fat across the board, what you need to do is shoot units that, even if they may not be your main priority right now, they are more likely to die. So if there's an enemy infantry unit sat on an objective in the enemy's deployment zone or in the midfield, in turns 2, 3, that kind of thing, and you think, I want to take that objective, but then there's another enemy infantry unit, just like a unit of scouts or something, or whatever, it doesn't matter, elsewhere on the battlefield within range, that is in the open, that's exposed, that's not going to get a cover save, shoot that unit. It doesn't matter that it's not a priority unit, because again, you are trying to use your Baals to set yourself up for an advantage in the late game. That is the key use of the Baals, to set yourself up so you've got an advantage and board control in the late game. So you just see that unit that's exposed there, kill it. See that unit that's, you know, Eldar sort of support unit, shoot it down, trim it down. See those bikes, trim them down, you know, because they're in the open. You know, it doesn't matter, just like spraying down, killing off models here and there, spraying around, just trimming the fat. Because all of this is going to set you up, you know, if those units of bikes that you've got that you don't really want to invest other units in attacking, you know, if you can take 2 or 3 models away in the first couple of turns, they are way less effective in the late game because you are more able to deal with them with your remaining units in the late game. You've set yourself up for an advantage in your late game. Yeah, you've only got 3 Terminators left in turn 4, but, you know, the units that are going to try and stop your Terminators, you know, have been wounded slightly and trimmed down also by your Baals. So you're just spreading your fire around in whatever way is going to give you the most return for your investment in your Baals. Kill the most units, most wounds is the key. So turn 4, you're going to survey the battlefield. You're going to say, right, where's an objective that I want to take or that I can't take and the enemy sort of can't reinforce. Okay, so you'll either have objectives that are sort of in the midfield, you've been fighting over them, or, you know, in an area of the battlefield where the battle's still going on and that fight can still continue. You can still pour more units onto that objective and soak in the enemy. What you're going to do is you're going to use your Baals from turn 4 onwards to hammer that objective. Just anything that goes onto that objective, you just spray it down. Anything they try and put near that objective, spray it down. Then move an infantry unit out of cover and advance them across into the open, because then, you know, they hope that they'll be able to run onto an objective turn 6, spray them down, kill them, you know, that kind of thing. You hammer an objective and totally shut down any movement around an objective. So the enemy knows if they try and reinforce that objective in any way, you will kill those reinforcements, and make that very clear with, you know, some good bursts of fire turn 4 and turn 5, and then you just take that objective because they know they're not going to reinforce it. You know, it's just you psychologically own that area, use those Baals for your board control in the late game. Alternatively, there may be the other type of objective you may take is an objective where you can't take the objective off them, but they can't reinforce that objective. They can't get more units onto it if the units that are holding it die. So let's say they've got, you know, some Guardians on an objective or some bikes on an objective, but they've shot those bikes across. You know, they went first or something like that, and it's turn 5, and they shot those 2 bikes across to take that objective. And you can just move your Baals 12 inches. You know, you've got your Storm Bolts to give you that extra little bit of burst if you get close, or if you don't have to move, you don't have to move, even better. But what you do is essentially you shoot down that unit, kill that unit off that objective. You can't take the objective, you can't get close enough, but that's fine because you've cost the enemy 3 points usually, maybe 2 points, it depends. So what you're doing is you're tipping the balance in your favour in a way that the enemy can do nothing to prevent. Nothing. So, you know, you're using your Baals to basically maximise board control. That's what they're doing throughout the game. In the early game, they're thinning down the enemy, so the enemy sort of loses their late game board control. And in the late game, you lock down objectives with their high rate of firepower to just shut down any OBSEC units that are going to try and take objectives, and then you take them with your OBSEC units and your infantry. And that's what they do for you. So, that's basically how to use Baals in turns 1 to 3, and then turns 4, turn 5, and then onwards if the game continues. Now, I will wrap up the video here because I think that's basically all you need to know about Baals. If you've got your 2 Baals there, you can use them really effectively to win your games. You've just got to be really cheeky with them and really clever with them, and use them you know, in a way that affects the battlefield but isn't obvious, to summarise. Now, one caveat I will say is to reduce points investments, or if you say only own 1 Baal, how can you use these tactics of the sort of 2 Baals going around the hunting pack effectively? Well, what you can do is you can take a Razorback with an assault cannon, or even just a Razorback with a heavy bolter if that's what you own. Now, this is the cheaper option. Now, if you're doing this to save points, don't then specifically buy an infantry unit to put in the Razorback. Having an infantry unit in the Razorback brings a whole new host of tactical advantages to this combination, because those infantry can prevent the hunting team from getting locked down by infantry assaults and cheap assaults from cheap infantry, and they can, leap out, take objectives, and really sort of, if the Baals clear the assault cannons from the Razorback and the Baal, or heavy bolter from the Razorback and the Baals, clear an objective, those infantry can take the objective and be the responding counter-assault unit. So that opens a whole host of tactics which I'll let you explore yourself. And you can also keep, if you've got assault marines that are just hidden away, ready to take opportunistic strikes against the opponent, like snatching, low-level characters, again seizing objectives, softening up objectives. That Razorback can be a great place if you just, a transport is always useful, is basically what I'm saying. But if you're trying to do this for the cheap option, don't then go and spend points on putting 5 or 6 men in that transport, because then you may as well have just bought the 2 Baals, and the 2 Baals really is a very solid investment, and it will be throughout meta changes and that kind of thing. Baals will always be useful. What you use them for may change, but they'll always be useful because they're an essential part of the Blood Angels sort of fluff, and they're a really cool part of the Blood Angels identity, and they have a really distinct sort of place in Blood Angels armies, so that will always be recognised by Games Workshop in one way or another. They're never going to be rubbish. You'll always have fun with them in one way or another. Now, if you aren't bothered about spending points, but you are bothered about spending money, you've bought 1 Baal, you've had some use with it, but it's not really impressing you that much because it's only on its own, it's not doing that well, and obviously you don't use them with character support, as you've probably picked up from this. You don't use, you work them independently. You don't think of investing character support in them. They're just flexible on your battlefield, so you don't want to spend the money on another Baal, but you've got a Razorback knocking about, then yes, do in that case spend the points on having that infantry unit, and get a plasma gun in there, to up the firepower of that unit in close range, and sort of, or put some devastators in there with a couple of heavy bolters, which is a really nice trick you can use, or just to up the firepower, you can hop them out, so there's a lot of flexibility in that alternative of 1 Baal with a transport. So, that is the one other way to use Baals if you're not using them as a hunting pack. Use them sort of half hunting pack, half reinforcements to a transport, or use the transport effectively around the battlefield in a variety of other ways, and the Baal just really complements that transport very nicely, and the transport complements the Baal very nicely. It's just a match made in heaven. So, I've discussed how you can use Baals independently, how to match them, in your army if you've only got the 1 Baal, as well if you're not willing to get 2 Baals. So really that is everything you need to know on Baals. So thank you very much for your time. This has been the Schola Progenium. Goodbye.